One of the expectations in a dissertation is that you read extensively and then synthesize and evaluate that information before you include it in the report. And you are expected to back up with references any content based on the work of others. And at the end, you will have to include a list containing all the references cited in the document. I've had outstanding dissertations citing less than 100 references, and I've had average dissertations with more than 200. And a few years ago, one of my students broke all the records. If you want to know how many references she cited, keep watching the video. In this video, I'm going to show examples of excellent and average dissertations and the number of references they used, following by answering the question, how many references? I'll then explain some of the factors that contribute to a student being able to effectively use a large number of references. And I will finalize by explaining some factors that will influence the number of references you are likely to use. So, how many references should you cite? The answer to this question is not a straightforward one. Lower performing students usually cite 60 or more references, average students a minimum of 80, and the better students will cite at least 120 references. And just to put things into perspective, I mean an undergraduate dissertation, and in the UK, at least at my university, we are talking about a 10,000 word document from introduction to the conclusion, and this excludes primary data evidence. So this would be tables for quantitative data and participant quotes for qualitative data. But is the number of references indicative of the grade? Not always. Let's look at examples from undergraduate dissertations. This undergraduate dissertation, which focused on developing an adaptive model of trust development practices in corporate client event agency relationships, cited 138 and achieved a top grade. If you're not familiar with the UK grading system, a grade of 70% is already what we call a first, which is a very high grade, and a grade of 80% or more is an exceptional grade. And this is exactly what this dissertation achieved, a high first. Conceptually speaking, the focus was on trust, the concept of trust, and more specifically on practices that are required to develop trust. The particular context that was researched was developing trust between the event agency, which organizes events for corporate clients, and the corporate client. If we go to the end of the list of references, we confirm that there are indeed 138 references. This dissertation on the effectiveness of online well-being events in satisfying the need for existential authenticity also achieved a very high grade, a high first, so 80% or more. But it used only 92 references, so much fewer than the previous one, but it still managed to achieve an outstanding grade. The key concept here is existential authenticity, and therefore this was the lens that the student used to observe the object being online well-being events. If we go to the end of the list of references, we confirm that there are indeed 92 references cited. This one cited many more references, 244, even though the grade was not as high. The grade was a 2-1, which in the UK means between 60 and 69, and in this instance it was a high 2-1, a high 60s grade. And the topic was on the effects of the design of King Charles III coronation on the heritage brand value of the British monarchy. And therefore, the key concept was heritage brand value. If we go to the end of the list of references, we confirm that there are indeed 244 references. This one also cited a very good number of references, 145, but the grade was lower. It was a 2-2. In the UK, that means between 50 and 59. And this particular one was a mid-50s one. And the reason why a dissertation with such a healthy number of references only achieved an average grade is that the introduction and the literature review were very strong, which is arguably where you will be using more references. But then the methodology, the results and the conclusions was not up to the same standard, and therefore the average ended up being in the mid-50s. Nonetheless, the students showed very good skills in terms of identifying, analyzing and writing about so many references. If we go to the end of the list of references, we confirm that there are indeed 145 references cited. And at the beginning of this video, I said that some students had cited well over 200 references. Well, this one cited a whopping 278 references, which is outstanding. The dissertation focused on the influences on the effectiveness of normative message framing on changing attitudes at outdoor music festivals. Theoretically speaking, the focus was on both attitudes and normative message framing. And if we get to the end of the list of references, we confirm that there are indeed 278 references. This may take a while to get to the bottom. This student also performed extremely well, but not as well as the other students that got a high first. So this one was just short of a high first. The grade was a high 70s. The slightly lower grade had nothing to do with the student's ability to identify, analyze and synthesize so much literature. It was just towards the end in the conclusion. It was not as strong as it could be, and certainly not as strong as the other two, and therefore she lost a few points here. But it doesn't take any merit of the student in terms of using references when compared to the ones who got high firsts, over 80%. In summary, a large number of references is usually a good thing, but it's not necessarily a proxy for the final grade. As we've seen, you can cite a lot of references and still have an average grade. And you can cite even less than 100 and still achieve a top grade. It's not about quantity, it's about a mix of quantity and quality. And more importantly, it's not about the number of references that you use. It's about how well you use them and whether they make a valid contribution to develop a high-quality dissertation. At this stage, you're probably shocked at the number of references that some dissertations use. How is it possible to use so many references? There are many contributing factors, and in this video I'm going to explain two of those factors. The first one is that it's all about progression. My students, the ones I supervise, they are events management students, and they are prepared from year one to academically underpin their work. In the first semester, maybe a handful of academic references are okay, but in year two, expectations go up. Less than 10 does not get the highest grade. And the better students will start submitting assignments that cite close to or over 20 references for a 1,500-word assignment. The number of references that final year students cite is even greater. And it's greater not only because the expectations go up, but also because their skills have increased. They have been used to cite throughout the first and second year of the degree, and therefore now they are able to embed references in their assignment more seamlessly. In a 15-word assignment, it's not uncommon for students to cite 25, 30, or even 40 references. And you're probably thinking, but my degree hasn't pushed me as hard as you guys do. While your starting point is probably a different one, it doesn't mean you cannot improve your skills. You can catch up throughout your dissertation. And this is particularly if you have several months until the submission of the dissertation. The second factor influencing whether you are able to use these many references or not is a strong focus on theory and rigorous methodology. The literature you can use can be divided into academic and non-academic sources. Academic sources are available through journal articles, textbooks, edited books, conference proceedings, maybe PhD theses, whereas non-academic literature comes in the form of maybe websites, magazines, newspapers, and so on. If your dissertation is heavily focused on theory and methodology, you will be required to use academic references extensively. After all, you have to back up everything you say that is not yours with appropriate references. For example, all the methodological choices have to be explained in detail and the explanation backed up by appropriate references. And these references will be mainly academic. For example, the dissertation about trust development practices shown earlier, only 4 references were not academic. And the dissertation about existential authenticity, of the 92 references, 83 are academic references. If your dissertation is a strong one, It's built on a very sound theoretical basis and explains the methodological choices in detail, and you will naturally be citing a lot of references. If you're enjoying this video, press the like button, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so that we can grow the community. I recorded a longer version of this video which features in the Virtual Tutor online resource. The longer video includes extended explanations what I'm covering in this video, more examples, as well as an explanation of the 4 skills you will be demonstrating if you effectively use a lot of references. Details are in the description below, as are other means of engaging with me, including one-to-one or small group support. There are a number of factors that influence the number of references. Besides the accumulated skills of the student, there are other factors influencing the number of references used. And this can be classified between person-related and research-related, and in this video I'm going to cover 2 research-related influences. The first one is how rich the literature is. In other words, how developed the theoretical area is. For example, the one on normative message framing focused on an area where there is a lot of research, and therefore the study is prone to use a larger number of references. In contrast, research on existential authenticity is much more limited, and therefore there's a much smaller pool of papers to draw from. The second area refers to how scattered the literature is. Is the literature scattered across fewer studies, or is it published across a wider number of studies? For example, the dissertation that cited 92 on existential authenticity only focused on one area, existential authenticity, which is not the most researched area, and a lot of the research in this area comes from a small number of papers. And therefore the pool of studies that the student could use was much reduced, and therefore naturally the number of references that she cited was lower. Even though the student focused on an area, existential authenticity, that was not as well researched as other areas, she still did a stellar job with the available literature, and therefore the top grade. At this stage, it is important to reiterate that you shouldn't feel the pressure to cite 200, 250, or even 300 references. The extreme examples that I've shown you, they are quite unique. And as I've said, the average is much lower than that. And students still can do well, as we have shown by looking at the top dissertation with 92 references. One of the most important skills required to be able to use a lot of references is analysis. In this video, I explained the process, and you may also want to watch this one on how to analyze papers.